The village was quiet, but something inside the house was not. Camilla's heart pounded as the shadow of the little girl crept closer, her small, blurred face barely visible in the dim light. Camilla's body felt paralyzed, unable to move or even scream, as icy fingers brushed her cheek. The coldness seeped into her skin, draining her strength with every touch. She realized, too late, that she wasn't just a visitor in this house. She was its next victim. The girl's hollow eyes locked onto hers, a faint smile twisting her lips as the air grew impossibly cold. Time slowed, and Camilla felt her very essence being pulled into the darkness, the house claiming her piece by piece. But before it all began, Camilla had no idea that her curiosity would lead her to the house that no one ever dared to enter. Let's go back to the beginning of the story. In a remote village, there stood an old house at the end of a road that no one ever visited. The house sat on a clearing surrounded by thick forests. Its partially collapsed roof and moss-covered walls hinted at the age of a building long abandoned. But more than just its worn appearance, the house carried an aura that made anyone who saw it feel uneasy, as if something was hiding within the darkness that covered every corner of the house. That night, a thick fog enveloped the village, making the atmosphere even more eerie. The moonlight, which normally lit the path, was now covered by dark, heavy clouds. Only the faint silhouette of the old house could be seen in the darkness. There was no sound except for the rustling of the wind through the trees, as if nature itself conspired to maintain the silence of the night. Inside the house, the creaky wooden floor quietly groaned as a shadow moved between the dimly lit rooms. There was no sign of life in this place, except for the stale smell that hinted it had not been lived in for a long time. Large windows, covered in dust and cobwebs, along with dried leaves piled in the corners of the rooms, stood as silent witnesses to the stories hidden behind the house's walls. The next morning, a young woman named Camilla, who had just moved to the village, decided to take a walk. Her curiosity led her to the end of the road, where the old house stood. Despite whispers in the village warning her about the place, Camilla, with her bravery and sense of curiosity, chose to approach the house. The morning fog still blanketed the village, making the house look even more sinister, but Camilla continued to step forward. Her footsteps halted in front of the large wooden door, tightly shut. Camilla examined the carvings on the door, which seemed like ancient symbols she didn't recognize. Although fear started to creep into her heart, her stronger curiosity urged her to touch the door. But at that moment, a strong gust of wind suddenly blew, flinging the door open with a deafening sound. Camilla was startled, but she didn't feel the slightest bit afraid. She continued to step inside, greeted by an overwhelming silence. Once inside, Camilla immediately felt a chilling cold that pierced her bones. The wooden floor creaked under her feet as she walked further into the house. Her eyes scanned every corner of the room until she found a wooden staircase leading upstairs. An unexplained curiosity pushed her to climb the stairs, even though her instincts told her otherwise. When Camilla reached the upper floor, she found a long hallway with closed doors on both sides. The atmosphere upstairs was even quieter and more suffocating, as if every step she took was being watched by something unseen. At the end of the hallway, there was a door that looked different from the others. It was larger and appeared older, with carvings of the same symbols she had seen on the front door. Carefully, Camilla opened the door and found a large room with windows tightly covered by thick curtains. In the center of the room stood an old wooden table, covered in dust. On the table lay an old book with a worn leather cover. Camilla picked up the book, opened it slowly, and saw pages filled with handwriting she couldn't understand. However, something in the book caught her attention. Inside it, there was an old black and white photograph of a family, but their faces were blurred, as if time had erased the details. As Camilla stared at the photograph longer, a feeling of unease began to take over her. Faint voices, almost like whispers, echoed in her ears. The voices grew louder and clearer, causing her to feel dizzy. She quickly closed the book and placed it back on the table. But as she turned to leave the room, she suddenly felt something cold touch her shoulder. Camilla immediately ran out of the room, hurrying down the stairs. Fear gripped her, but her curiosity still held her back from leaving the house entirely. Therefore, she decided to explore the rooms on the ground floor, hoping to find some clues about what she had just experienced. In one of the rooms, she found an old photo hanging on the wall. The photo showed a man, a woman, and two little girls standing in front of the house, perhaps during its prime. Their faces looked happy, but there was something in their eyes that made Camilla feel uneasy. She felt like she had seen them before, but couldn't remember exactly when or where. In the corner of the room, Camilla noticed a small, half-closed door. She opened it and discovered a staircase leading down to a basement. With a bit of hesitation, Camilla descended the stairs and found a dark room, dimly lit by light seeping through small cracks in the walls. In the room, there was an old wooden chest, locked tightly. Camilla's fear grew stronger, but so did her urge to open the chest. She searched around the room and found an old key hidden behind a loose brick. With slightly trembling hands, Camilla inserted the key into the lock on the chest and opened it. Inside the chest, she found something horrifying. An old doll with a damaged face and torn clothes lay inside. The doll seemed almost lifelike, as if it had once belonged to someone who cherished it dearly. But what shocked Camilla the most was when she found a neatly folded letter beneath the doll. Camilla carefully opened the letter. The handwriting on the paper appeared rushed and messy, as if the writer had written it in deep fear. The letter told the tragic story of the family that once lived in the house. The father, Emmett, was a quiet and withdrawn man. It turned out that Emmett had done something terrible to protect his family. He had made a desperate pact with dark forces, which ultimately led to their destruction. The letter also mentioned the doll that Camilla found in the chest. The doll had once belonged to Carla, Emmett's daughter, who had tragically died. Since then, Carla's spirit was believed to haunt the house, seeking revenge for the deal her father had made. After reading the letter, Camilla immediately felt a chill sweep through her body, as if something was watching her from the darkness. She realized that she needed to leave the house quickly before something worse happened to her. However, just as she was about to leave, the door at the top of the stairs suddenly slammed shut with a loud bang, leaving her in total darkness. In the darkness, Camilla felt something strange. Her body felt heavy, and she heard voices she couldn't understand. The voices weren't just coming from around her, but from within her as well. Panic overtook her as she realized she couldn't move, as if a force was holding her in place. Amidst her panic, Camilla saw shadows moving around her. The shadow grew closer, and the coldness in the air intensified. As the figure became clearer, it revealed the shape of a young girl with a blurred and wounded face. The little girl stood before her, staring at her with empty, expressionless eyes. Camilla wanted to scream, but no sound came out. She felt a fear unlike anything she had ever experienced before. The figure moved closer, and Camilla thought this would be the end for her. But before it all ended, Camilla had a strange realization. The little girl wasn't just haunting the house, she was searching for someone to replace her. Camilla understood that she might be the next target to fill the void left by the little girl. This thought sent a wave of terror through her, but there was nothing she could do. The darkness began to take over her mind, as if her life was being drained away by the evil force within the house. Time seemed to slow down as Camilla lost control of her body and mind. The shadow of the little girl now stood directly in front of her, her empty eyes gazing deep into Camilla's own. It felt as though the girl was piercing through her soul, while the freezing cold spread from her fingertips to her entire body, preventing her from fighting back. Camilla knew that the force controlling her was not something an ordinary person could resist. Slowly, the shadow lifted its small hand and touched Camilla's face with a cold, lifeless touch. In that moment, Camilla realized that she was not only a witness to the tragic story of the family that had lived in the house, but would now become part of that terrifying tale. The little girl's faint smile was filled with suffering and despair, as though inviting Camilla to join her in eternal darkness. Camilla's thoughts began to fade, as if a force was pulling her into an empty, dark void. Her vision blurred, and her heartbeat slowed as she lost consciousness. In her fading mind, she saw flashes of the past, memories that were once beautiful, but had now turned into grim, haunting shadows. When Camilla woke up, she was no longer in the basement. She found herself standing in the living room of the house, but something had changed. It was as though time had reversed, and the once ruined house now appeared brand new. The decaying, moss-covered walls were now clean and bright, and the dusty windows were letting in soft sunlight. However, despite everything looking normal, Camilla sensed something strange. She felt a strong presence surrounding her, filling every corner of the house. She quickly realized that she was now trapped in another dimension, a place where time didn't follow its usual course, and everything was stuck in an endless loop of suffering. The house had trapped her, and she had become one of its unseen inhabitants, just like the little girl who had been haunting her. Camilla tried to find a way out, but every door she opened brought her back to the same spot. She wandered aimlessly through the house, feeling more and more lost with each step she took. The whispers returned, louder and clearer than before. They kept repeating the same name, a name she had never heard before, but somehow felt familiar. As she continued her endless journey through the house, pieces of memory started to appear in her mind. She saw glimpses of herself, but in a different life. A life not in this village, but in a faraway city. In those visions, she saw herself living happily with her family, far from the haunting shadows of the old house. But those memories quickly vanished like smoke, replaced by the harsh reality that she was now trapped in an endless nightmare. Camilla felt that the house had taken everything from her, her memories, her hope, and even her sense of time. She began to forget who she was, as if her entire existence was being erased by the evil force that controlled the house. In a moment of eerie silence, Camilla realized something terrifying. She had become a part of the house, a part of the darkness that she could no longer fight. She no longer recognized herself. Only a faint shadow remained of who she once was. The time she had spent in the house blurred the line between her and the house itself. She didn't know if she was still the Camilla she used to be or something else entirely. Time passed meaninglessly in the house. Camilla, now just a shadow of her former self, continued to wander through the darkness, searching for something she could never find. But the longer she stayed in the house, the more her faded memories started to resurface, fragments of a past she had once forgotten. As she explored the house for what seemed like the 100th time, Camilla discovered a small door she hadn't noticed before. The door was hidden behind a pile of dusty old furniture. Filled with curiosity, she opened the door and found a small room filled with old mirrors. In the center of the room, there was a large mirror that was different from the others. It was clean and free of dust, as if it had been used recently. Camilla approached the mirror, and as she stared at her reflection, something strange happened. Her reflection began to change into a young girl who looked very much like one of the family members in the old photo she had seen in the house. In an instant, long-forgotten memories came flooding back. Camilla suddenly remembered that she wasn't an outsider who had just moved to the village, but a member of the family that had lived in the house decades ago. She was Camilla, the youngest daughter of Emmett, and the only one who had survived the terrible events that had befallen her family. However, something even more horrifying became clear. Emmett's pact with the dark forces hadn't been to protect the family, but to grant immortality to his youngest daughter, Camilla. The pact had sacrificed the rest of her family, while Camilla's spirit remained trapped in the house, living under the illusion that she was someone else each time she woke up in the house. Every few decades, Camilla's memory was erased, and she would be reborn as a new resident, curious about the house. The house would then replay her family's tragedy over and over, endlessly imprisoning Camilla in a cycle of eternal suffering. Camilla now understood that she had been living in this cursed loop for years, never truly alive or dead. Each time she rediscovered her true identity, the cycle would begin again. Her memories would be wiped, and she would once more become someone new, drawn to the house to relive the same fate. But something was different this time. With all the overlapping memories from years past, Camilla began to feel a deep weariness. She no longer wanted to continue this endless cycle. With a firm resolve, she shattered the mirror that had revealed the truth to her, hoping that by destroying it, she could break the chain of her cursed fate. However, as the mirror shattered into pieces, Camilla only felt a thicker darkness envelop her. The mirror had been yet another illusion, another trap in the house. Even though she had destroyed it, the cycle continued. Camilla's body began to fade, as if it was being absorbed by the house itself. Her final memory was that she had tried to fight back, but had failed. When everything ended, the house returned to silence. Nothing remained of Camilla, except a faint trace in the air, as though she had never existed. But the house waited, still, for the next soul to be caught in the same endless loop. In a distant village far from the crowds, a young woman had just moved into the area. She heard stories about an old house at the end of a road that no one ever visited, a house that was said to be haunted. However, her curiosity overpowered her fear. She decided to take a walk, and unknowingly her footsteps led her to the house. As she stood before the tightly closed door, it suddenly opened on its own, welcoming her inside. The woman, who was none other than Camilla in a new form, stepped in with a strange feeling of déjà vu, and with that, the same cycle began once again. A thick morning fog enveloped the village, covering all traces of what had happened over the years. The old house at the end of the road still stood with a quiet grace, despite its decay and ruin. The sky was gray, the trees around the house swayed gently, and the cold wind carried the damp scent from the surrounding forest. Inside the house, deep silence filled the rooms, and shadows of the past haunted every corner. Camilla, now lost within the endless cycle, stood in the center of the living room. Her face no longer showed fear or despair because she had become part of the house, trapped in the repeating labyrinth of time. Although her soul had changed and been forgotten, fragments of awareness still lingered in her shadow, a faint yet powerful instinct connecting her to a past that had never truly disappeared. Outside the house, the village continued its slow rhythm, as if the old house was merely a distant shadow in the edge of their minds. People walked along the streets, busy with their daily lives, unaware of the tragedy that repeated itself in the house. Yet among them, some felt something strange, a restless feeling they couldn't explain, as though something was drawing them toward the house. Something unseen but always present behind every whisper of the wind, in every shadow passing through the night. Time passed without meaning in the house. The seasons changed, but inside, everything remained still. Nothing changed except for the souls that came and went, lost in the unseen labyrinth of suffering. Camilla, who once fought against the dark forces, was now only a shadow of her former self, trapped in a cycle that never ended. With each new beginning, she forgot who she was, only to rediscover the horrifying truth, and eventually sink again into emptiness. Somewhere in the house, the front door creaked open slowly, pushed by a gust of wind. Outside, a young woman stood on the threshold, staring inside with a strange mix of fear and curiosity. Inside, the darkness welcomed her with thick silence. The house, waiting patiently, was ready to repeat the cycle that had played out for so long. Like Camilla before her, the young woman stepped inside, and the door closed behind her, locking her fate within the eternal circle that could not be broken. And so the story began again, without end, without hope for escape.